Ever wondered how I would apply Marcelo Bielsa's principles into Football Manager? Well, on today's show, that's what I plan to do. Naturally, these are my interpretations. I've been requested quite a few times on replicating his tactics. Now, when it comes to replicating tactics, it's easier if you start from somewhere. And on today's show, that's what I plan to do. We'll be covering two possible ways we could make it work on Football Manager. My name is Daljit. Welcome to Bustthenet. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to stay in touch for more videos like this. The challenge of replicating any system lies in understanding the underlying reasons why the system was used in the first place. For me, beginning with this is usually the best way to at least apply some of the principles into the game of Football Manager. We can't certainly say that any replication will be 100% accurate. The game has its limitations, but what we can always do is make it play by these principles. Marcelo Bielsa, the current manager of Leeds, is widely respected, but when he was appointed to lead Chile at the 2010 World Cup, that reputation was more modest, particularly when he was also the manager who oversaw a disappointing Argentina in 2002. Today, we are accustomed to an intensive high-pressing game. Back in 2010, we had to endure a World Cup where 30 out of 32 teams weren't interested in regaining the ball quickly and uniformly dropped into their own third when they lost the ball. Two teams stood out at this World Cup: Spain, the eventual champions, and Chile. Both sides were dramatically different. Whenever Spain won the ball back, they were patient in deeper, non-threatening areas and would work the ball interminably towards a shot on goal. Chile was a high-speed train intent on hurtling towards the opposition goal the moment they won the ball back. Their brand of football was different to anything else being witnessed at the World Cup. Chile were a modest team, defensive and physical. Bielsa shaped them into a high-pressing, intensive team that harried you when you had the ball and moved you around quickly when you didn't. They played with an alarmingly high defensive line and would press opponents in their own half. He played with converted midfielders and used Claudio Bravo as a sweeper keeper. This was a team that played the ball out of the back. In defense, one could say they resembled a 4-1-4-1. In attack, however, they were a 3-3-1-3 that aimed to control the half spaces. Without David Pizarro in midfield, Bielsa asked his team to push forward and man-mark aggressively. Three forwards were spread in attack with an elegant playmaker sitting right behind the roaming lone forward. This was a system that was also notoriously vulnerable. They had plenty of chances in front of goal but wasted them. Their tempo was so high, sometimes it appeared they couldn't relax and finish off chances easily. Their high press and man-orientated marking system also meant they were vulnerable to disciplinary action. That high line of theirs also meant their defense could be picked apart with balls over the top. Bielsa has accepted these as a consequence of their style of play. Over at Leeds, it's almost the same thing. The shape looks like a 4-1-4-1 and then morphs into a 3-3-1-3 in attack. The weaknesses are identical. In fact, Chile's high-pressing style came to naught against Brazil in the World Cup as they were outdone by their neighbors' rapid counter-attacking style. Bielsa resigned, but his ideas led to a revolution in football. Jorge Sampaoli took inspiration from him after taking over. Chile continued to employ a high-pressing intensive system and in 2014 defeated Spain in the group stages. It was a match defined by an aggressive pressing style dismantling Spain's tiki-taka. So these are the principles I want to adopt in Football Manager. Aggressive pressure, man-orientated marking, a 4-1-4-1 that morphs into a 3-3-1-3, and shorter passing played at a higher tempo. The next step is to draw up a system. To be honest, I never expected to be using this with the newly promoted Kingstonian side in the championship. We're a side no one expects to see do well, so like a good underdog, we decided to throw everything at the opposition, better to go down fighting. After a poor start to our season, I had at my disposal players who could be redeployed as inverted wingbacks, and a side that I had put together which shared certain common traits like work rate and teamwork. These are vital to any high-pressing system. Stamina, natural fitness and acceleration rounded out my key DNA for the side. If you're going to play an aggressive game, that sees action move from one end of the pitch to the other quickly, we're going to need these attributes. These are key attributes a team absolutely must have. In fact, when you look at any Bielsa system, these are also common denominators. The challenge when trying to replicate any system on Football Manager is trying to replicate everything, and that's when things usually fall apart. You can't replicate Chris Wilder's underlapping central defenders in the game because, frankly speaking, those roles don't even exist. So when I try to replicate any system, I normally try to understand the rationale for the positions during the build-up phase. So before we hit there, how are we applying these principles to the game? To obtain the high press and aggression, we'll play with a much higher defensive line and a much higher line of engagement. We will use man-to-man marking. The system I'll use is the 4-1-4-1 DM, and I'll also ask the front three players and the central midfielder on attack to mark specific positions. Now this is where things get challenging. We need to pay attention to games and make adjustments when necessary. Specific position marking is slightly better than specific player marking, because whenever a substitute is brought on, that specific position may have a different player, and using specific position marking allows us to get around having to make too many individual changes during a match. What we need to bear in mind is when they change formations. We will need to adjust it if, for example, the system goes from using fullbacks to one of wingbacks. Our wingers will be told to specifically mark the positions where the fullbacks are going to be playing, or the wingbacks depending on the opposition formation. The lone forward is told to mark a specific defender, generally the one with better ball control. And finally, the central midfielder on attack or the carrilero will be told to mark any defensive midfielder or playmaker. Personally, I prefer using the carrilero because this will leave the central midfielder on attack free to attack the opposition when we win the ball. I will also be employing split block pressing in front and on either the central midfielder on attack or the carrilero. To add icing to the cake for our aggressive press, we'll also use hard tackling. This can be an issue for some teams, but it's central to our system. This means that you'll need to be aware of players in your side who have a competitive streak in them. If they pick up a yellow and have high aggression, you may need to bring them off. So having a good substitution strategy, ensuring you have adequate backup for the right positions on the pitch is important. The second part of applying Bielsa's principles involves the formation itself. Why pick a 4-1-4-1? The reason is simple. They seem to favor that formation in defensive situations, so that will be our starting point. In order to get the aggression in the system, we'll also be using a halfback who aggressively patrols the back line. The use of the halfback will split the two central defenders, giving us our three at the back when we have the ball in attack. Next, we use two inverted wingbacks. These two roles will defend as wingbacks but transition into defensive midfielders when we are in possession, giving us control of the half spaces. To give the option to add width and danger with the occasional cross, I'll use the overlap. Bielsa's system usually has a creative influence sitting behind the three in attack, and this is where our CM on attack comes in. To gain the creative influence, I prefer to use traits rather than a specific role. So choosing a player with good off-the-ball decisions, passing, vision, work rate, and dictates tempo, play skiller balls will be important. Arriving late in the box is also a good idea. In attack, we're using an inside forward and a winger flanking a complete forward. The choice of a complete forward is necessary because I want a role that roams, holds up the ball for others, and be the player linking up attacks. Our passing will be shorter, but we'll also be playing on a higher tempo with narrow attacking width. This is done because my side is weak. Passes will be focused inside and players will be closer together, ensuring we keep the ball as much as possible. The counter press will be used to aid our possession, and counter will be used to influence quick transitions when we win the ball back. The system has obvious weaknesses. Firstly, we are playing with a much higher defensive line, leaving us open to balls over the top. Players will need good teamwork, work rate, and natural fitness to play a system like that. Defenders will need to be fast too. Mental attributes should not be ignored. These include positioning, concentration, and anticipation for defenders and fullbacks, off-the-ball agility, passing decisions, and composure for midfielders. The challenge with playing with as pure a Bielsa system remains. He plays with very high lines. These are almost suicidal. In FM, if we wanted to make it safer, we would need to play it closer to a higher defensive line with specific man-orientated marking. If you are faced with a 5-3-2, we need to ask our wingers to specifically man-mark the positions played by the wingbacks and decide whether the central midfielder or the Carrillo marks the DM. Personally, using the Carrillo is a better idea, leaving the CM free to assert himself. If you're facing any back four system, then the wingers focus on the fullback positions, and if there's a DM in any one of those systems, the Carrillo is set to man-mark that position. If it's a flat 4 midfield, like in a 4-2-3-1, then the Carrillo will focus his attention on the playmaker in the midfield duo. The final piece of the puzzle involves opposition instructions. These need to be applied to fullbacks or wingbacks to ensure that these players are always covered. What about defensive width? Defensive width would depend entirely on your strategy. If you want to draw teams in and you want to soak up some pressure before hitting them with the counter attack, then I recommend having defenders with good jumping reach so that you can play on a narrow defensive width. However, you can also play a highly aggressive system higher up the pitch and deny their fullbacks time and space on the ball. To do this, you will need to be playing on maximum defensive width and apply the specific position marking on the fullbacks or wingbacks, and use opposition instructions on these players whenever necessary. If we wanted to get something a bit more closer to Bielsa's system with Chile, we'd probably be using a 3-man backline. We will be seeing a complete forward to close down more, a winger we close down more, mark tighter, mark specific position, close down more, mark specific position with these two wider players. The Engash does nothing. The inverted wingbacks just close down more. We'll also use a DM on defend duty and 2 ball playing defenders with a central defender on defend. In this particular case, well, if you wanted to follow Bielsa's principles, you go like this. But however, I don't want to play like this because I'll get completely thrashed. Instead, what I've done is a bit slightly more different. I've gone with a defensive with narrow to draw teams down the flanks so I can counter attack them up the flanks. If that makes any sense, it does to me in my head. I hope it does to you as well. When teams come this way down the flanks, we are going to get an opportunity to release the wing on attack, the complete forward on attack, or even the inside forward. Now naturally, if the inverted wingbacks move into these positions, which they will during the midfield consolidation phase, I will get my 3 in midfield. So the 3 defenders are here, the DM on defense just acting like a rock, and these 2 players pushing into midfield, creating my 3. There's a 1 here and there will be 3 in attack. This is a system that could also play in a more traditional 3-3-1-3 setup. Defensively, it will drop into a 5, and then offensively, there's going to be a lot of vertical movement between the lines, and this can create quite a lot of problems for some teams. Naturally, you want to be very careful with your player selections because these 2 positions, they're going to be a bit tougher to fill because you're looking for defensive midfielders who can also play as inverted wingbacks, something that Arturo Vidal was doing for Chile when Marcelo Bielsa used the system. This is an Engash. You need somebody who's pretty talented. He can play killer balls, holds on to the ball. He needs to be the hook and attack. Finally, we have the central defenders. I like the idea of having 2 ball playing defenders. It would be good if this player comes deep to get the ball, so you could replicate one feature of Chile's Bielsa system. However, this could sometimes be an issue if you wanted the keeper simply to play the ball out. Most of the time, the DM just acts as protection for the back 4. In terms of instructions, we use distribute. The backline, distribute quickly, counter press. We also play with the hit early cross instruction. We want to play very narrow as a width because we want to encourage more inside passing before it switches out to the wider players. We're also playing with more direct passing, a higher tempo, run at defense, and be more expressive. So as far as installing his principles are concerned, I'm looking at aggressive pressure, I'm looking at verticality in passing, I'm also looking at position marking, as well as aggression in tackling. Naturally, there'll be people who probably disagree with me, and I'm perfectly okay with that because here, I've been clear, I'm trying to apply his principles with 2 possible tactics that can morph into a 3-3-1-3, the 4-1-4-1, and something a bit more orthodox, a 3-3-1-3. Naturally, there will be a lot of people with different points of view, And that's the beautiful thing about Football Manager. Everybody has a chance of making it work in their own way, and this just happens to be mine. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. You can always look at me on Twitter at Bustthenet or addicted2fm.com, my website. Once again, I want to thank everybody who's supporting me in one way or the other. Your support means a lot to me. You guys take care, stay healthy. I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.